record at this point. Next week is Tu B'Shvat, so we'll have a brighter and livelier theme. But this week, it is the week preceding the United Nations Day set aside for the members of the Holocaust. And it also coincides with my mother's birthday, which is January 25th, or with 2 days of it. And I found some other interesting coincidences. And the 27th was the day chosen because that's because that's the day Auschwitz was liberated. And it turns out my mother was liberated just 2 days before that, just about on her birthday, as far as I can tell. So I'm going to go right into that. And I'm going to put the share screen back on for us.
Yeah, that's the reason I'll be talking on Thursday, because
it's your day.
Auschwitz, because
right.
I was in Auschwitz.
Yeah, you were in Auschwitz, and then so you had to hang around a little bit longer because they moved you to Dachau. So you had to go a little bit longer. So I'm going to open up though with this musical rendition again. This one from my friend Marina Wax, and this is. Remember, I'm not sure who the voice is behind this. Is an original composition. We'll warm up with this as a prelude.
Remember when, just like lilies in the field, we blossomed so freely when and will of willed. Remember when both our hearts and days were filled with hopes and dreams that made us sing. Remember when, much like eagles in the sun, our hearts climbed upon the winds of change that come. Remember how, when our flight was ever young, how quickly pain made all that change. Remember, for morning's sake, remember the night. Remember the heartache, and love will survive. Remember how much we once lost to the night. Let those tears help to at least open our eyes. Remember, don't let our blindness hurt us twice. When yesterday can light our way. Remember what love itself cannot forget. The memory shall light the path of our new quest. Remember, for to the future we're in debt to guarantee posterity. Remember, through each new day, remember the night. Remember the teardrops, treasure the smiles. Remember, remember.
Okay, so I'm going to open up the screen right now, and this is going to, let's see if I get it right. Okay, so I'm going to tell you here my mother's own account, and I thought it's so important because I think, Joe, you understood this. What Jews in the Holocaust went through was so oppressive and so devastating, and yet you came through. And I think so many, what we're going through for now, especially for so many young people, where things seem overwhelming for a great variety of reasons, between the COVID and economy and job prospects and so on. And the sense that the climate is going to collapse on us and the world is coming to an end, right? And you can sort of say, been there, done that. Hold on, let me go here. That's it. And so opening up full screen here. There we go. Scroll of Esther. That's what I call it, because, and I'll explain to you my mother's name. The butterflies coming out. She was a graphics artist, and so this is one of her designs, and I picked that as the artwork in her memory. And so my mother's name, those of you who remember her,
Yes,
she
we
used to
do.
sit here for, while I was the rabbi here, and then stayed for the years afterwards. And so her nickname was Irka, Irene Weinberg, Irene Gottdenker. She was born Gottdenker. And her name in Hebrew is Esther. So it's very appropriate. Esther is the public name of record for Hadassah in the Megillah of Esther. And Esther, in the ancient language of the Middle East, well, Esther is a pagan goddess. She's Ishtar, the morning star, Venus. But in Hebrew, Esther is from Nistar, hidden. So under the guise of being the pagan, she's the hidden Jew. So I found this the appropriate metaphor, because as Esther pretended to be a pagan on the outside, was a Jew on the inside and saved the people, so my mother Esther on the outside became a pagan. I don't want to say about Catholics that, but the same thought. And saved not only herself, her aunt, and several other people that way. So, and the best way to save is by hiding in plain sight. And what do I mean? This is how one hides. You go out to a water fountain, you have a friend take a picture of you, everything is absolutely normal. This is a fountain in Warsaw, Obozna Spa. It's in the middle of Warsaw. So how is this possible? You can stand outside. This is 1943. What a terrible year for Jews in Warsaw. And she's standing there in plain sight. So a little bit about my mother's background. All these stories I heard from my mother. I was a young man before she told me anything. I was 25, and she prepared her first tape recording. Then she did some other interviews and the video. And so that's how I pieced everything together. Like many survivors, they didn't talk about what they went through till years have gone by. Well, here's my mother, born January 25, 1922, the older child of Norbert Gottdenker. I'm named after my grandfather, Norbert Nachman Gottdenker, and her mother, Helena Eiger, family name Eiger. Okay. So then a year later, her brother, Karol, was born, and in the city of Lvov. It is now Ukraine, Lviv, then Lvov, and also under German and Austrian period, it was Lemberg. Many Jews know it as Lemberg still. It was a city of about 300,000, 1/3 Jewish, the rest Polish and Ukrainian. Also a city known for art and architecture. It's considered still the Paris of East Europe because of the architecture. So a little of the family, my grandmother on my mother's side, Helena, daughter of Nisan and Nathan Eiger and Chayasas. His great-grandfather was the leading rabbinic scholar of his day, Rabbi Kiva Eiger, or Eger, as it's spelled. So Nachman, my grandfather, Norbert, son of Koppel Gottdenker, Soshi of Zarvanisa, he could trace his line through the family to the Kahanas of Siget, and also related to the Weinbergs of Dolina, right? Which became my father, right? Also related, second cousins. So let's go ahead. Just to introduce my family here. On the left side is my grandmother, Hinda, or Helena Gottdenker, who was killed in Lvov. My mother will talk about that. Her brother, my uncle Karol, whom I never met. In fact, I never saw this picture until after my mother died, and it was in her documents. And there was no clear identification. I sent this picture to someone in Australia who had grown up with my mother. And he said, yes, that's my friend, my dear friend, Karol Karolcio. And then my mother's aunt, whom she saved, and maybe they both saved each other, Dora, the sister of Hinda, Dorkitze Eiger. She was able to survive together with my mother. So my grandfather and grandmother met because he had been a soldier in the Austrian army in the Great War. He'd been injured, and a young woman from the town of Podvolochisk, who was looking out for wounded soldiers. She met him, and that's how they got married. He brought her to Lvov. He worked as a supervisor for a lumber company, as a transport system. It was a system owned by his maternal grandfather, Moses Zaravanitsa, who was also my father's grandfather. So you see the connection. And then his son, Judah. And at some point, he brought the family to Bolachov. And the city is next door to Dolina, known for its lumber business. So here are two pictures from Bolachov. My mother would tell me of a childhood, carefree childhood, cross-country skiing, summer hikes in the hills. And unlike most Polish Jews who lived in primarily Jewish neighborhoods, she lived in a mixed neighborhood. She had good friends of all backgrounds, whether in Lvov or in Bolachov. And she remembers that her Catholic friends from a neighboring orphanage would look at her with long braids and say, "You are so beautiful, we could pray to you like to marry." So here are some pictures of her. You can see the long braids, the tzepalach, over here and over here. And this fellow in Australia was able to identify the two people, the people here sitting in the park with her. He was a very good identification. What helped my mother was she spoke a clean Yiddish without any accent. And she knew Ukrainians from her neighbors and German from her school. And she knew some Hebrew because the first school she went to was a Beis Yaakov school for girls, which in that day was actually considered progressive Orthodox. Today it's ultra Orthodox, but then it was progressive.
Yeah, but yeah.
And Yiddish, she really didn't know much Yiddish. That wasn't her language. She could understand some, but she really wasn't familiar with it. These were very Polonized. They were first under the Austrians, Germanicized and then Polonized, not Yiddishized. And this is a picture of my mother's aunt, Dora. She is herself, she likes to imagine herself as a gypsy. You can see she puts the scarf on, the beads, and she's got cards in her hand. She would tell fortunes, and my mother would say she'd be very scared of her aunt because her aunt would pull cards and they would know exactly what was going to happen. A very interesting character in her own right. So I put that up. Now, just for your background, so you see, my grandfather died young, and then the family had to go back to Lvov. And my mother was then about 16. She started music and art studies in Lvov at the conservatory. And she had a beautiful voice, mezzo-soprano. Those of you remember her, she still was singing nicely till the last year. She was singing in Roxbury Park for senior citizens till her last days. And then, if you remember your history, war broke out in 1939, September of 1939. The Germans invaded Poland. And I want you to notice this very significantly. The war broke out in this region, which is Obersilesian, right around here. I'm with my marker.
Yeah.
And there was an attack on a radio station on the border in a town called Gleiwitz. Supposedly, it was an attack by Polish soldiers on Germans. And that was the pretext that the Germans used to invade Poland. That's a very significant location. When I get to the end, why. So the Germans took the western half of Poland. You can see the line. And the Russians came in to protect the Poles and took the other half. Joe, which side of the line? Were you on the Russian side or the German side at the beginning? A German or the Russian side at the beginning?
No, on the German side.
So they got you right from the beginning. My mother was
Yes.
lucky then because she had 2 years to prepare.
Yeah.
Right. So the Russians were on top.
Closer to Lodz.
Closer to Lodz, yeah, which is up here. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're right in the midst of things as it started.
Yes.
So to my mother's luck, she was on the other side of the line, gave her more time to prepare. So she couldn't continue her studies. There was too much disturbance. She found a job as a bookkeeper in Trust. It's a department store in Lvov. And then she picked up Russian at this point from the Russian occupiers. And then 41, the Germans invaded the eastern part of Poland. They occupied Lvov. You can see this map. The Germans had this map ready. This is a 1941 map. So they knew where to go when they came in. And so my mother described that the Germans marched in with bands and leaflets about liberating Poland from the Soviet Stalin, right? The town was heavily Ukrainian. The Ukrainians did not like the Poles, and they did not like the Russians. If you remember, Stalin killed a lot of Ukrainians, caused them their
Yeah.
death by starvation. So they resented the Soviets heavily, and so when the Nazis came in, everybody came out to greet them because nobody loved the Russians, nobody loved the Soviets. So the Germans used the locals, especially the Ukrainians, and they called on former neighbors and friends and classmates to find the Jews they knew and pull them out of the crowds and deliver them to their hands. So my grandmother, Helena, was caught in one of these dragnets, thrust into a building. The Nazis, my mother says, heard reports from friends, the Nazis and their allies set attack dogs on them who mauled the people inside. And then, this is to say to the good, there were many Ukrainian and Poles who were good. One Ukrainian friend rushed in, pulled her out of the building, and saved her at that time. Right? We have to remember there were righteous Gentiles. Very important. Not enough, but they were. So some 4,000 Jews were killed in pogroms right at this time, and 2,000 more shortly thereafter. What they did is that the German regime segregated all Jews. My mother lost her job. They removed from their home at Grunskvalska 12, could not take any of the possessions. Her mother was caught again, sent to Yanovska labor camp. And my grandmother was executed by machine gun killing in mass graves at the Piaski, those are the sand hills outside Lvov, made to fall inside her own grave. And this is reported to my mother by connections with people in the underground. Her brother Karol escaped to Buchach, and I'll hear her talk about that, in the eastern edge of Poland. And he was sheltered there by Poles till the last days of fighting. And the Germans then were rounding up every man they could to prepare against the Soviets. They caught him, discovered he was Jewish, and executed him. But my mother never really believed the report that he was executed. She had hopes always that he was still alive till the last day. She herself, in the beginning, hid out in the dank cellar of a house while a friend secretly bought her food to sustain herself with. And then by summer of 1942, she had to vacate the cellar. Germans were beginning to hunt down Jews by use of tracking dogs. That's when things began to turn slightly. So here's what happened. There we go. In her own words.
Little room, running quickly, and that was the time, I don't remember exactly the date, when they started to round up the Jews to send them all into the ghettos, to put them there. So everything had to be cleared, and the Jews had to go to the ghettos. And that was something interesting, but then I said, it's just a sheer miracle, I don't know how to say it. Since we were in this, I and my aunt, my mother was already in ghetto, my brother was already in ghetto. I and my mother's sister lived still in the same apartment, and he came in running and said, look, you have to get out of here, or you don't have even time to get out of here. Yeah. Just sit quiet here. And we were in one room, and they knocked at the door, and the father, the neighbor who lived there and had one son, asks his son, go look who it is. So the boy is 14 years old. He goes out to the door, and they ask him, are there here any Jews living? And he says, no, there are no Jews here in this house. And they looked at him, and they took his word for, you know.
Now, this was the German military?
Yes. And we were sitting here and could see everything through the Venetian blinds, only through the little opening in it, what's going on. They left. We still didn't move. We didn't breathe, not only didn't move, we stopped breathing, I think, at that time. After a minute or so, they're coming back with dogs. And I said to my Aunt Dora, that's it, and we embrace each other, and that's it, that's the day. They went down to the basement to look with the dogs if they would feel any Jews. They came out, they didn't find anybody, they left. And the father of this boy asked him, who was it? So he said, nobody. Somebody asked for somebody if they live still here, and they left. Okay, that was it. In an hour or so, this man, that Ukrainian, came, took us both out, and gave us a room to stay. Say, well, we'll see what will happen.
Okay. So we're going to see what happens. So now what she needed was to prove, if she goes out, that she was Pole or Ukrainian, but not Jewish. So among the false names she used, fake name, was Pilsudskova. That's the name of the first president of Poland, Pilsudski. And she
Yeah.
would use different jobs in agencies and get rubber stamps, government stamps. And because she had training in art school and graphics, she made false papers look authentic. And so she helped herself and she helped others. But here's how she got her first papers. So this is continuation of the story, how she got her first papers in a safe house in another part of Lvov.
And he says, you remember, in this house where you used to live, there moved in a German officer, Colonel Mayor, who knows his rank. And he will give you papers. He wants to give you papers, and you will live on Aryan papers.
Now, this was a German
That
officer
was-
that you didn't know?
That I didn't know that he was a Jew.
Oh, my.
Okay, and he has his family, his wife and his brother. His parents were already killed in Germany 2 years before. Now he comes in here with the German army. I didn't know that he was. Anyway, since this one first Ukrainian who wanted to be a clergyman, he knew how to write the birth certificate with Latin, in Latin and so on. And he stamped it, it was all right. It cost a few $100 a piece, and we got the false papers. But he says, wait a minute, you are not secure 100%. Just stay a while, we'll see what will develop. My mother was already in the ghetto. He got papers for my brother too, and he took my brothers to a family in Buchach.
That's where?
There in Buchach is a small town and on Ukrainian border with Poland and Ukraine today. And he lived there till the very end. He and there was another Jewish boy. I know that they survived. They lived with this family, and they had the meanings to help out the Jewish boys in resistance in the woods that were hiding. They were bringing them food and whatever they needed, whatever they could. Now, I know that my brother survived to the very end of the war, but if you remember from the history, when the Germans were retreating, they still started to create another army, the Fifth Army, I think they called. They were the Wehrmacht and the werewolves. The werewolves was the latest, the lowest kind of army. Out of the senior citizens, old people, they dragged them out. They gave them uniforms and guns and go and look still for Jews. Not even fight with the Russians, just look for Jews. And they started to look for young boys that were not yet in the army. And they found my brother. And that's how I know that my brother was killed, because they knew immediately that he was a Jew. They just had to strip him, you know, like every church. But I'm still not taking the last word for it. Anyway, my mother was in ghetto. If you ever heard of the Piaski in Lvov, Piaski are the sand hills where they used to put people up the hill and then they're shooting down and they fell down into the graves. That's where my mother died, in Piaski. I lived in another with my aunt in another part of town. She was in another part and I was in another part. We still have contact with each other through this Ukrainian man.
What was this man's name?
I cannot reveal. Yeah, I don't want to dig out.
That's okay.
Okay. And he may be not alive anymore. Because he was much younger, much older at that time than I was. Anyway, she died on Piaskis. We were in different part of town. He also found me a job. I got a job as a governor, as a governess to 3 children of a German officer. I had to take care of them, and I had to furnish him apartment for him. He didn't know, of course. He knew I was a Poland, okay? He treated me like a Polish housekeeper, something like this. I took care of his children.
Did he ever ask to look at your papers?
Well, yeah, they looked at the papers, but they were so stupid, you know. They didn't know. They looked at the papers. The papers, what we did with the papers, we ruined them, so they will be a little bit ruined. I got the papers. They didn't know. The papers, the birth papers were written in Latin. You write female or masculine for genders. And on mine, instead of female, was written masculine. And I knew a little Latin because I went to school. I learned Latin. And I recognized immediately that mistake. So everything was all right, but this was the one mistake. I ruined the paper. I folded it like here, so that the gender disappeared. It was only Irene. I lived with Irene. I was born with Irene. That's my name, Irene, okay? I never changed my name because to make it authentic Polish, I picked up a Polish calendar which had all the saints. And in Poland, calendars were marked by the names of the saints. And I found that was, on my birthday, that was the name Irene. And I kept it. So anyway, now you ask me if they ever checked my papers. I will come to it. Ask me if I forget, because it's important. And he trusts me. So I was there for a while, arranged.
Okay. All right, there you go. I went ahead a little bit on this in the middle. She talked about how my uncle, her brother, was killed. But you see how you use the papers and you use your artwork and ingenuity to make papers fit the person, even if it didn't really fit. Now, go ahead. Here is in Lvov. My mother was able to save photographs. They were mostly little tiny, passport photo size. That's about the way to say it. So she was able to figure out how to pass as a Pole with the right documents. And what else? How could she pass as a Pole? Jews had a Jewish look, but she didn't. Right? She said, well, my eyes saved you. She had blue eyes. Most Polish Jews had dark eyes. She spoke Polish without trace of a Jewish dialect, and she spoke German as well. So she could claim to be Pole of German national origins, which the Germans could understand because their southern Poland, the area of Galicia, was under the Austro-Hungarians. Germans had settled there. And from her childhood friends, she learned enough of their religion to act like a Catholic. And her facial features were more Central Asian than what might be typical Jewish features. Again, if you look at this, her ID from her office, see that, the way that between the makeup and the trim, right? Doesn't look like a Jew of Poland, more like somebody from Central Asia, Kafkaz, Turkey, in those areas, right? So that helps also. So she started work as a nanny in a German family, you heard that, and then she got to work in a lumber office. So the ID here shows the word Holzbau, right? Meaning a lumber factory. And this is her, and that will show her at her desk. This is her at her desk in the factory and getting rations. It's a grocery store, and she's picking up some rations. Okay, and here's how she worked in that factory.
apartment and took care of the children. From there, job, because I was already more secure, and I got a job in a lumber
Sorry.
yard, because my father was I don't know how to use this word in English, and all the words escape me. He was in a lumberyard business in Carpathian, small chain of trains that bring the lumber down to the mills and so on and so on. So I knew something about the wood and about lumbers and about things, and I made up a story, and I got a job there as a secretary, personal secretary involved. I worked there for a while. I met a couple of German people. Some were decent, some were dogs. There was one young German man who saved a Jewish girl from the concentration camp. But what God wants, he dies at 42. He got a heart attack. How did I know that he died? Because I met this girl in Frankfurt, where my husband became a rabbi in Frankfurt after the war. And she said, you know who I am? You remember William Schlett? I say, yes, of course. Say, you know, he was my husband. You know, he saved me from concentration camp. And I didn't know. I knew him as a German. Anyway, one day, when the war broke out between Americans and Russians, when they started bombarding the Germany and coming into Poland again, that was at the end, but 42, yeah, I think it was 42 or 43. They bombarded Lvov, and at that day, you're asking me for another miracle. I had a dream that my mother came to me, and she like poked me and said, watch out, look up, and watch out. And I'm looking up, and there are black ribbons floating above me. And I said, okay, that's something's going to happen here. And that day they bombarded Lvov, and when we had to go and to the office and clean up the office, whatever that happened. But when coming out of the office, I was blackmailed.
Okay. Going to go into that. What happened to her at that point? All right. She talks about being blackmailed. So here is the account of what happened. Let's go ahead. Let me actually go into this one second. Yeah, I will go ahead. This is the story of how
A Jewish girl. Why I say Jewish girl? Because she spoke Yiddish to me.
And what did she say?
She says, you are either going to give me money and all your clothing, or you are going with me right away here to the SS across the street, because I know who you are, I know where your mother is, and I know where your brother is. All the time I could deny to everybody who would stop me or would recognize me, and I would deny. They're crazy. There are 1,000 people that look alike. I could not deny because she said the truth. I couldn't say, no, you are lying. Anyway, I said, okay, I can give you money. That's all what can give you some money. I can give you some of my clothes, but they're in different places. I went to she went with me. She had a carriage and a horse, you know, a troshka. And she went with me to my house, not to my house, to my aunt's hiding place. I said to her, you wait here, and I will come down with the money. Don't follow me, because you will get nothing. I'd rather go with you to the SS. So she stood there. She didn't follow me.
How did you feel when she approached you? What was...
Do you feel my heart bumping now already? Like a tremor, like an earthquake. But I had to stay firm.
And you managed
And
that.
I managed, thanks God. I don't know where I got all that strength and, you know. Anyway, I got money from my aunt. I say, look, you have to give me money or we are both doomed. So she gave me some 300 zlotys, and I gave it to her, and she gave me some money. Sylvia, I didn't have my money. She gave me some money to get, I say, I'm going out of town. I gave her the money, and I'm going out of town. You don't look for me, I will find you. You wait till you hear from me. How did I get out from this girl? I gave her money, but I knew that it will not be the end because she still wants my clothing, she wants this, she wants that. I went back into the house, and I knew that there was an alley to get around and to get out to another street that she won't know where I am. And from there, I went to the railroad station. I hopped in the first train that just came in. I didn't look which direction it goes. I just hopped into the train and I left. Now, she didn't find me.
Okay. So that's how you go. You have one identity and suddenly you open up with the new identity. She took on the train. She got off for different directions, Krakow to the west. Somebody helped her get from Krakow to Warsaw. All sorts of connections with the underground, people that she knew. One sent her to someone else, and eventually she got to Warsaw. She was in Warsaw. She was able to notify her aunt of her new location. Her aunt met up in Warsaw. So how did she survive in Warsaw now? She managed to get jobs in government agencies like the Ministry of Agriculture. This is a picture of 1939 Warsaw, what was then the Agriculture Ministry. She became secretary to the head of personnel, secretary of personnel. She got access to official stamps and seals, and she was able to forge documents. She also made sure that her boss, who was an alcoholic, had plenty to drink, so he wouldn't ask questions. That's what happened to King Ahasuerus, right? He wouldn't ask questions. So here's how she got the job and how she got an apartment complete with its own set of Nazi officials.
Now, what did do we? Okay.
We've got time.
In Warsaw, I found a woman. She was Jewish.
Now, how did you find her?
I didn't find her. She found me.
How did she find you?
I don't know. Jews have some feeling for other Jews. Not so Poles. Poles were stupid. Excuse me, if I may say it. They couldn't. You know, but I think Jews are like the Spürhunde, like the dogs that find you by the by the smell. She says, "Come on, don't worry. I have somebody here who needs help in his office." And it was a German officer. And can you type? Do you speak? Of course I spoke German because I spoke German from school that I learned, and then I started, any occupation was important, I started to learn. When Russian came, I started to learn Russian. When Germans came, I started to learn German. And I knew German also from years before a little. Yes, I can type, I can do office work. And I got office work there in the personnel department in Warsaw. I was in heaven. I got a small little room that was with string attached. I will give you a small room in an apartment. You have to keep this apartment clean. You are not allowed anybody in or out, not authorized.
Who told you
The
that?
Germans. You know, the office, the director of the office. You can live there. You will have where to sleep. It will not cost you anything. You have to take care of this apartment. That's fine, cut. It's a big deal. Of course I can do it. So I worked in this office, and I took care of the apartment, and I lived there, and nobody bothered me. Now, why did they need this apartment? They have sometimes some dignitaries coming to Warsaw, the city, and they were afraid to stay in the hotels. They preferred to stay in a small, unsuspected. Why? Because they were afraid of Poles. The Poles were organizing their Anderson army that time. You know,
The resistance.
the revenge army, yes. And they were killing them. They were afraid to be killed by them. They trusted me. They trusted me. They went to their bedroom. They had gun on one side, a gun on the other side. But they trusted me that I will not let anybody in and nobody will come in here. They knew that nobody has come to me. But during a week or 2 times period, nobody ever bothered me. I made out, since I was working in the personnel department, I was able to get out cards, working ID cards that they retrieved either from Poles and sent them to labor camp. They took away their their ID cards. And what I did, and I don't want you to tell anybody, nobody will know it, I took off old cards that were on this ID card, and I put the picture of my aunt, and I put so that the stamps fitted exactly the place where it was stamped. You know how you stamp ID card? Half stamp is on the picture and half stamp is on the other side. So I have fitted the picture exactly where the other side of the stamp comes in. So I had ID card with a name, with a working place for my aunt, and I sent it. I said, what happened? What will be, will be.
Now,
I
where
mailed it
did
to
you
her,
send it?
to Lvov,
And you sent it to the address where you knew she was
where
staying?
my aunt was, because that time she lived with this man, lived in the same apartment, okay?
Okay. So that's how she found the apartment and was able to get my aunt to Warsaw with her. So she hid her aunt in the apartment in a closet inside the apartment, and she could only go out of the closet when the apartment was empty. But as odd as it may be, Germans followed orders. Officers and gentlemen, and never touched Irene or went into a room, except for one time that they grew suspicious and checked the room, but found nothing. So here's what happened next.
So I left. And they saw there's nobody in here, and so they could go out. I left to work, and they went to work too. I came at that day, I come earlier home because I was a little frightened about her. And I'm looking, bed is empty, and I'm looking in the closet. Maybe she's hiding there, but I see all my clothes and all her clothes are there. I didn't know where could she be. She couldn't get out without me. She didn't have even a key to get out of the apartment. I'm looking in the closet and I'm pushing like the dresses, and then suddenly a hand stretches out to me. I didn't laugh that time or screamed. I don't know what would have happened that time. You know.
And she stayed with you for how long?
She stayed till the war broke out, till the invasion.
Okay, so back some of these. A little bit of humor for us. Even when you live in hiding and under fear, you have to have a sense of humor and adaptability, I guess, right? Sneak out and grab my mother
She
from
was a very,
behind.
very smart woman, and she knew how to get out with you know what she needed for
And
her.
so are
And
you.
she needed. I was just lucky. I was.
No,
I
it
was
sounds
just
as though
lucky.
you were very brave and very
I
smart.
just wanted to have, you know, when I was in that, do I have 2 minutes? Because
2 minutes.
if you want to, how bright she was. When I was living in that apartment in Warsaw, I had to cook sometimes for these two men. I didn't know how to cook. She cooked. One day, they sent me a box like this. I said maybe for gratitude they sent me flowers. And opened the box, and there's something slimy, long like a snake. That was an eel. And they wanted to have an eel, you know. So if I can cook eel, of course I can do eel. I said, you just go to work, let me stay home today. She cut up the eel, and she makes, and she cooks, and she prepares. Now they're coming home, and they're opening the little window from the kitchen to the living room, what I am doing there. And she put my sleeve up, and she had a big knife with spattered blood from that eel, and she smears my face, and I'm holding that knife. I say, you get out of here, or you have no eel. And he sees my hand like this.
Well, it's so good that you could keep
Yeah,
that kind of
sure,
humor going in
of
such
course.
a
One
terrible
day
situation.
it was day before Christmas, they got a turkey, and they're going back to Berlin, home, and they're taking that turkey with them. And they just went to work, and I went to work too. She locked the turkey in their room. When they came back, they couldn't get it. They couldn't get the turkey.
Oh, my. Well,
Oh my God,
we must-
they went without it.
we must stop now.
Okay, right, humor and perseverance. So I'll show you a few pictures, and we're going to wrap up our story inside Warsaw. Sunny days in the countryside, you'll see, and pictures in the wartime in Dąbrowska Square, only 2 blocks from the ghetto wall, and also another picture of her having a meal in her apartment. So let's look at that. Summertime, 1943, she's able to get out into the countryside, put on a swimsuit, put on a smile. Wintertime, one of the fellows from our Polish Shabbat identified the locations for me. It is only 2 blocks from the Warsaw Ghetto. And here she is, fashionista, right? And at the famous fountain. Here, Warsaw, 1942. That's just, I guess, when she came into Warsaw. My mother went through the photographs and tried to date them, identify them. And here she is in her little apartment having a breakfast. I assume it's a breakfast. There's a little teacup and saucer and the teapot, right? You would not know that she's shaking inside from this. Right? During the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, during that time, she would take the trolley, the streetcar, and go past the ghetto just to see what was happening. She would pretend, because the driver became suspicious, why was she going in that direction every day? She would pretend that she was visiting her parents' grave at the other side of town. There was a cemetery there. And she said she had, huh?
Yeah. Cemetery in Okopova.
Oh, that's it. So the other side, yeah.
Yeah,
And she
big
knew
cemetery.
people fighting on the inside. She knew the people who were fighting at that time with the Germans. All right. So this is a shot from, just not from her camera, but what the trolley would have looked like. Last days of the war, the Russian and Latvian troops approached Warsaw. My mother said they especially used Latvian and Kalmyk forces. They were more savage, less likely to befriend Poles than the Russian counterparts. And if you know anything of the story, the Russians intentionally waited on the other side of the Vistula River to let the Russians and the Germans fight it out, so they could take over a weakened Poland. That was their plan all along. Warsaw was in a panic, widespread burning and looting all over. I won't go through this. I think you can watch it later on. So in the interest of time, she got out thanks to the German army, because what was happening was the Germans were in a panic. They grabbed some 50 people in her office, put them on trucks, ran away as fast as they could, hoping that in case the Russians would approach, they would see Poles, not shoot at the Poles. And so they used them basically as hostages for themselves. And then at some point they dropped them off, abandoned them, or ran away. She made her way to Silesian, Obersilesian, Upper Silesia, and she found work. Now, this again, she was acting as a Pole
Well,
because of her
great.
language. She got a job in a vinegar factory, and they also put her to work in a labor camp on the Odonisa line to dig anti-tank trenches. They would stop the Russians, they hoped. So she first was in Mishkova and then Gleibitz. So the tank traps failed. The Russians came in from behind. She mentioned earlier the German Wehrwolf. Those were the senior citizens, the Social Security members of the army. They fled and fell into their own trenches. And as the day fighting ended, there was tremendous anarchy. And so a German friend offered to help Irene, but as the Russians were approaching, he said, the Russians will tear us apart, and ran. So I have here February 1945, but actually, if I look on the history charts, and the Russian army came into Gleivitz in January 24. My mother's birthday, January 25. So right for her birthday is the liberation, actually. And as I say, that date, just around her birthday, that's her birthday present. And as I said, it's ironic because the same spot where World War II began was the German trick to incite the incidents of the attack on the radio station there. So then when the Germans were out, the Poles started fighting. They were taking revenge on those who they thought had betrayed them. So there was a tremendous turmoil. Anybody who studied this period knows that in the months immediately following the war, there was tremendous disorder and disarray in all of Europe, especially so in Eastern Europe. And so no rations. She's staying in a small town. She didn't have to hide, but she spent about 2 months, she said, just on bread and water. And she would sleep all day long just to fight the hunger. The mental torture worse than the physical, but finally friends found her and brought her food. And then things began to settle down. Life returned to normal. So these are scenes from Mishkova and Czestochowa. Czestochowa is the city of the Polish Pope, John Paul II, Czestochowa.
It's
Maybe
called the Holy City.
right.
The Holy City.
The Black Mary,
Yeah.
famous icon. So my mother visited it. Right, she played a good Catholic. So here's a picture of her in somebody's office with maybe I don't know who she knew in the past. Young fellow there. I don't know what office that is. Here's a little photo shot of herself here with some friends out in the open. They can walk freely. There's no fighting. She gets herself a new ID card now in the new government. Life, she's able to get back to normal life. Goes out to the countryside. You can see there, Czestochowa, 1945. And she stayed in Poland for about a year. She thought she would settle down. Her aunt had made herself a place in some small town. Aunt was very, very handy. She opened up a little black market in that town, sold things, goods, and so on. She was doing fine. There was no need to run. But then there was the terrible massacre of Jews in Kielce. And at that point, she said, you know what, time to head to Palestine. That is now Israel. So she joined up with the Bricha. That's the movement to settle Jews from Palestine to get Jews to Palestine from the refugee camps. She found her aunt. She had to convince her it was time to leave, convince her, and they got out. Tells funny stories about getting out. The Jews responsible for getting Jews out through the Bricha had trouble believing the beautiful Pole was truly a Jew. So she had to prove she was Jewish by what she could remember from her Beis Yaakov days. She remembered the Shema and some other prayers. She said them, and they said, okay, maybe you're Jewish. She made it over the mountains, and there were guards. They were set up by the British. The British gave her strict instructions to all the border patrols to stop Jews. So when they would stop people, they'd say, what are you? And they wouldn't say Jews because they would turn them in. So they said, your instructions are be Greek. What do you mean by be Greek? When they stop you, talk to each other in Hebrew and say you're talking Greek. And the guards believed them and let them through. So my mother tells us a joke that they come to one place and the guard stops them and he says, who are you? We're Greeks. Say something in Greek. And the one says to the other, "Ichobim in dread," which means he should be deep in the ground, dead. The other said, "Ichobim eich in dread." I also have him deep in the ground. And the guard answers them and says, "Ichobim Biden in dread." Now you're both in the ground, deep in the ground. There's a Jewish guard. So that's jokes. She got to Vienna, went to the Russian hospital. That was the layover place for the Jews. And at that time, my uncle uh, would go there to the Russian hospital looking if he could find family and friends. He found her, pulled her out, brought her, because they were second cousins. They knew each other from before the war, brought her to their home. She fell for my father, who, while he was 20 years older, still decent looking and had some status. He got a position at the refugee camp in Hallein, Austria. We're in the shadows of Mozart, Salzburg, running adult education university for the DPs. They married there. In 1948, he became Landesrabbiner of Hesse, Frankfurt, and they moved to Frankfurt. I was born there, the only child of Irene Weinberg, and we all came to the US in 1951. So I'm going to finish up with pictures of my mother and father in Hallein and Frankfurt, and then my mother in her last years at the first birthday of her great-granddaughter, Ariel Talia Ferd. I want to mention my parents left Frankfurt. They were in the lap of luxury because of my father's position. The Jewish community took very good care of him. He had the United States Army as his personal security detail. He was protected, but he did not want to face the Nazis were still active in Germany after the war, and there were threats on his life. He did not want me to be raised, so he chose poverty over wealth. And so he came to the United States. My mother worked in a sweatshop for 5 years while my father learned English till he was able to master English well enough to get his first congregation. So here there's my father, my mother in the middle, some friends at a celebration for Israel in the camp. There they are, my parents, enjoying the Alps in the Austrian Alps. And here in Frankfurt, the dedication of the new synagogue, a restored synagogue in Frankfurt am Main, and yours truly as a little baby, and my parents at a party of some kind, a better life. And here's my mother, blessed memory. She's about 80 at this point. That's the first year birthday for our oldest granddaughter, her oldest grandchild, her oldest great-great-grandchild. And the best Jewish revenge, sweet revenge, is from out of one came many, all right? Instead of a unum pluribus, right? Out of one, many. All this family tree and more to come on the way. So that's my memories for my mother. Blessed memory. Lesson all of us,
Rabbi,
never to fold. Joe.
Rabbi, you showed before that the massacre of Kielce. In Kielce, there were the Polish people after the war killed 42 survivors.
Yeah.
In the one town.
Yeah.
42 survivors who came back, they killed in Kielce.
Yeah. When Jews would come back, they would be shot because nobody wanted to give up property, especially.
That's right. That's why.
Business is business. Morality is morality. Business is
and
business.
Also, like you said, when the Russians were standing in Warsaw on the other side of the river, the Wisla, I could have been liberated in January of 45.
Right.
If the Russians would move in, but they were sitting there for about 6 months.
Right.
They didn't want to move into Warsaw because they didn't want to give the Polish underground the authorities that they were helping them.
Yeah. As soon as they came
there for 6 months, and from there I was there at the time, and then I went to Dachau.
Yeah. So you had more
liberated
camp experience. Yeah. That's it. The Russians were very cruel. There was a tremendous massacre of Polish officers. That's only now been talked about recently. And they did this in all of the East European countries. They wiped out any possible opposition, executed them, very simply executed them. So there was a Czech officer who was responsible for the Czech army. He helped get my father out of Russia, not intentionally, but was responsible. Well, he came back and he was executed. Anybody who could have been an independent figure against the Soviet occupation was eliminated. So that is some of the thoughts. But the main thing, Joe, as you know, is
Yeah.
as bad as things be, you slog ahead. You slog ahead.
Yeah.
That's the lesson. Okay, to everyone, to all of you, I wish you Shabbat Shalom, and may we not have to think about this anymore.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
Shabbat
Shalom,
Shalom.
everybody. Shabbat
Shabbat
Shalom.
Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat,
Thank you for
Shabbat
sharing,
Shalom to
Rabbi.
everybody.
Everybody
Thank
be well.
you,
Next
Rabbi.
week,
Shabbat
fun.
Shalom.
Next week, Tu B'Shvat, we can't have fruit, but we'll have singing and music.
Yeah.
Okay.